Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to continue the series on the Benoni defense with what is probably the most interesting opening in the Benoni, the Czech Benoni or the closed Benoni, which is this position you see on the board. Now the Czech Benoni is an opening which relies only on patterns and pattern recognition and knowing the plans and ideas which both sides can go for. And that is why this is going to be the first theoretical video where we are actually not going to be going through any theory. Because from this position on, knowing the exact move orders is almost at all not relevant, and knowing what to do with both colors, and we are going to look at this from black's perspective, is way more important. So we are not going to get into lines of 20 moves of theory or anything like that. I'm going to be showing you 10 plans, 10 ideas which you could go for, and we are going to be using actual games to show those ideas. I'm going to tell you what the games were, who won, and all of that. Okay, let's get into the opening first. So after white plays the move d4, black plays knight f6, white plays c4, black plays c5, white plays d5, and now if you want to go for the Benko, you play b5. If you want to go for the modern Benoni, you play e6. If you want to go for the Czech Benoni, you play the move e5. And now let's just first examine the two responses white could go for, which are just no good for him, and which is why you are, as white, basically forced to go into the Czech Benoni if black plays e5. So the two moves we are going to consider are taking on e6 en passant and playing d6. d6 is refuted quite easily, queen b6, and the pawn is going to fall. There's no way to defend it, so we don't have to look at that anymore. And after e5, if he takes en passant, then you of course take with the f-pawn and you prepare the d5 break. Even if they go e4, I mean, you can just take that. So basically there's no way for white to stop d5 now, which is going to give black an overwhelming pawn majority in the center, which is going to mean that he has a way easier game. So after e5, the correct move for white and the only move for white is the move knight c3. After knight c3, black plays d6 and white plays e4. This is forced. By move 5, you will have this position if you play e5 on move 3 as black. So knight c3, d6, e4, and this is now the closed or the Czech Benoni. Before we get into the games and into the plans, I'm going to try to explain some of the main ideas using this pawn structure, because the pawn structure in the Czech Benoni is the most common, is the most important feature of the position. So what do we have here? The first thing we can see is that the pawn structure is locked down, meaning that there's no action in the center. There isn't going to be any action in the center until the position opens up. So the main thing in the Czech Benoni for both sides, if they want to have any activity, is going for pawn breaks. Pawn breaks, there are 4 of them in this position, 2 for each side. Of course, you want to break the position up where your pawn chain is facing. In this case, for black, that means b5 and that means f5. For white, conversely, that means f4 and b4. Usually in this position, whoever is faster to break open the position to his own advantage is going to be better. So remember that in the Czech Benoni, going for pawn breaks is the main thing. Now, one thing I would like to mention, as a general rule, not a rule which is always applied, but more than 90% of the times, whenever black plays the move f5, white either has to take it, if he has a knight on f3. If he doesn't have a knight on f3, then the other option is playing f4. So whenever black plays f5, if you can't play f4, you take it. If you can play f4, consider your options. Conversely, if white plays f4, white tries to break open the position on the king side, black either has to take it or play f5. More commonly, taking is going to be the correct move. Now you might wonder, well, if black plays the move f5 and white takes it, then in this position, of course, the move e4 is not as powerful as e5 for white, which is correct. Black has a pawn on d6 which can be undermined, and that means that the d5 pawn could suddenly become a passed pawn. But on the other hand, the d6 pawn is also stopping e5, so taking is almost always correct, especially because black is going to be in many positions able to support this position, and the e5 square with his knight from d7 and with his bishop or queen from f6. Okay, now how does white or black approach this position? We are going to be looking at this from black's perspective, as I said, and I'm going to be showing you some of the common ideas using the pawn structure first. So the first thing we can notice is that the pawn breaks have to be prepared. So there are several ways to do that. On the queen side, preparing b5 can be done with a6, rook to b8, but also knight from b8 to a6, and then from a6 to c7, and then you can basically play the move b5. That's one thing. How does black prepare the move f5? f5 is prepared usually by playing the move knight to e8, and then you have your bishop on c8 controlling f5, you have your rook on f8 controlling f5. Furthermore, that can be supported with knight e8, g6, and knight to g7, meaning that you have your g6 pawn, g7 knight, c8 bishop, f8 rook, all supporting the f5 break, and then f5 becomes inevitable. So, in short, black can secure the f5 break unless white plays the move g4, which we are going to look at some of the examples. So the good thing for black is you don't need any theory here, and that's rarely the case. I don't think I've ever said that, but you don't need any theory. You don't need to take a book, and you don't need to study lines of moves. What you have to do is take 20 or 50 games in the Czech Benoni and go over them. I'm going to try to give you the intro to that with the game examples I've chosen. Okay, let's look at the first idea and the mainline idea. So let's get into the opening. If you don't know how to get into the opening, I would recommend one thing. Every time I start a new game, a new example, pause the video and try to guess the moves up to move 5 for black. And that way you're going to remember the position in 2 or 3 tries. So d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e5, knight c3, d6. And now, of course, e4 on move 5 for white. And now black can continue several different ways. The main plan is bishop e7 and going for quick castling. White can also do several different things. Black is almost always playing bishop e7 on move 5. White on move 6 can choose between g3, knight f3, and bishop d3. We are going to be exploring all of them, but not because of theory, because of different plans that can arise. To show you black's plan of fianchettoing his knight, I'm going to be playing the move g3, which is the main move. g3, of course, white is trying to fianchetto his bishop. Now, one thing that should be noted in this structure, and another plan very common for both sides, is both sides have one very bad piece. For black, that piece is the e7 bishop. Why? Because all of black's central pawns are on dark squares. For white, that's the f1 bishop. Why? Because all of his central pawns are on light squares. So ideally, what black would like to do is he would like to play a move like bishop g5, trade his e7 bishop for the c1 bishop. White would like to trade off this bishop for this bishop, because in this pawn structure, this is black's good bishop, this is white's good bishop. Okay, black now castles, white plays bishop g2, black plays the move knight e8, and now, as we said, knight e8 prepares f5 and goes for g6, knight g7, and f5. F5 can be played earlier on, but you have to be precise, and we are going to look at one example where f5 was just way too early. Okay, white continues with knight g to e2. Why does white play knight g to e2? Well, because you want to be supporting the g5 square, so that if black tries bishop to g5, you can play f4. You don't want to allow black to trade off your good bishop for his bad bishop. And now black continues with knight d7 or g6. g6, as I said, is the main line, so g6, bishop to h6, and you might be wondering, well, doesn't g6 just lose the exchange? No, because knight g7. And you'd be happy to trade off white's good bishop for your knight, you wouldn't mind that. And also in this position, one move has to be played for white. This should be a strategic exercise for you guys, and as I've already said, this is not a normal theoretical video, so I'm going to try to include you at several points. Which move does white have to play here, and why? Try to pause your video, which move is the best move here. I mean, it's not like you lose if you don't play it, but it's just the best move. Pause the video. Okay, white in this position should play queen to d2. Why is that? Because otherwise black will play bishop g5 and force either a trade of bishops or force white to give up his good bishop for the knight. Okay, and in this position, we have everything set up. What do I mean by that? We have our g6 pawn, we have our knight on g7, rook on f8, bishop on c8. What's the correct move? If you need some time to find this, if you didn't figure it out immediately, pause the video. The correct move is, of course, f5, and you want to break open the position as soon as possible to your own advantage. Now, if you remember, I've said at the start of the video when we were looking at the pawn structure, in 90% of the cases, it's correct to either take the pawn or play f4 if your knight is not on f3. In this position, there are several options, and I'm going to turn on the engine for this one, just so that I can tell you what the engine thinks of each one, what the correct evaluation is. So here, the engine gives the position as +1.5 with castles. f3 is the second best move, b3 is the third best move. So neither of the mentioned moves is correct because this is a specific position. If you took in this position, the engine still thinks it's +1.5. It doesn't really change its evaluation. And if you played f4, the engine thinks it's +1.5. So the engine just likes white in this position, regardless of what you do. Playing moves like b3 or f3 or castles is slightly engine-like. So I would recommend that you remember the rule, which I've said at the start of the game. Even if it's not the best move according to the engine, it's correct to do that. It's not a bad idea. So you can take or you can play f4. Okay, it's far less risky than trying to castle and going into a position where black can follow that up with f4 and just crush you. So take. And here I would like to talk about an approach by black in this position, which is called the King's Indian type setup. And if you know the King's Indian, black is also playing for the move f5. Usually the bishop is fianchettoed, and we are going to see fianchetto positions for black here as well, with the bishop, of course. Whenever f5 happens and ef5 has to be played, usually the correct way to play is to take with your g-pawn. Now in this position, the only move you can't play is knight takes because you lose the exchange, so you can either take with the bishop or with the pawn. I would always recommend taking with the pawn because this now gives you the option of playing the eventual f4. You can play e4, which is supported. If you imagined, let's say white doesn't want to face castling and f4. Let's say white castles queenside. Well, then e4, something like king b1 and bishop f6 becomes a very dangerous position for him. So even though playing g takes is risky because you open up your king, remember that it's a valid idea, it's a valid move, and similar to the King's Indian defense, you want to pry open the king side if the king is castled there. If you can support e4 and make this bishop a perfect piece instead of a dead piece on e7, then taking and getting this diagonal for it is more than enough compensation for the weakened g file. Okay, that's one thing. So the king fianchetto is one idea for black, and that's what you are going to see most commonly. Let's see one more way to go for f5, because you don't have to prepare it with g6, knight g7. Okay, so again, if you don't know the first 5 moves of the opening, I would invite you to pause the video and try to remember them. So d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e5, knight c3, d6, e4. Again, we are going to look at bishop e7. This time we are not going to be looking at g3, but knight f3 for white, which is also a very popular move, one of the 3 best options. Black castles, and you are always going to play these 2 moves first, just castle and play bishop g7, bishop to e7, I'm sorry, bishop to e2 by white, and now knight e8, again, trying to play the move f5, but now after castles, you don't wait for g6, knight g7, you can also go for the immediate f5. And now, what's the consequence of that? Well, one thing that has to be noted is, firstly, with the early f5, you are giving white the option to trade off his bad bishop early on. We are going to see that. Furthermore, you are giving up the e4 square when When you don't have an f5 pawn, or you don't have something on f5, that means that the c3 knight can easily come to e4. So later on you have to be aware of that. You are still playing the Benoni, even if it's the Czech Benoni and the e-file is closed. A knight coming to e4 is similar to the knight f3, knight d2, knight c4 maneuver in the modern Benoni when your d6 pawn is attacked. Here knight e4 is a very strong move attacking d6. So if you remember the rule, whenever black plays f5, you either take it or play f4. So here f4 is not possible, so you take it. Black, of course, recaptures. And now, as I said, this is white's stupid piece. You don't have good squares for the piece, you don't have good diagonals, so you trade it off because this is black's good piece. You can take, you can play queen d7. Retreating would make this bishop far too active, so you have to do one of those two moves. Let's say queen d7, rook e1, bishop takes, queen takes, and now you can choose between several different ideas. I think that going for knight a6 into b4, or maybe even going for knight a6, knight c7, a6, rook b8, b5 is an idea. It depends on which side of the board you want to play. So let's say in this position you go for knight a6, white plays a3, trying to either prepare b4 or stop knight b4. You go for queen f5 here, trying to trade off the queens, queen takes, rook takes, and bishop e3 again. This was just one plan. The other thing you could have done after queen takes d3 was knight to a6. Let's say a3, he stops you, he tries to stop you again. Let's say black plays an active move. White plays an active move. He doesn't want to play bishop g5 because this is your bad bishop. Let's say he just tries to, after knight c7, he just tries to connect his rooks. Rook to b8. Let's say rook to e2. a6, rook to e1, b5. If you can prepare b5 like this, then you have active play on the queen side. Ideally for black, you want to break open the position on both sides. That will mean that you have a lot of pawns controlling the center, that it's harder for white to exploit your weaknesses, and that you are playing with open files, which is always useful. Okay, so that was the early f5. After knight e8, you don't have to prepare it every time with the maneuvers of g6 and all stuff like that. Even though g6 is the second best move here, second most popular move here, the first one is knight d7 and something like a3, now g6, and once again going for knight g7, f5. You don't have to do that if the situation is correct, and usually the situation is going to be more favorable for f5 when the knight is on f3 and not on e2. Just play f5, get it over with. Okay, now we are going to be looking at one game by Yasser Seirawan, where he had black against Tony Miles. This was a quick draw, but I wanted to show you this game because of Seirawan's way to go for f5. So this was played in, I think, 80 something. Okay. So once again, if you don't know the first moves of the opening, pause the video. d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e5, knight c3, d6, e4. And now Yasser Seirawan goes for the main line with g6, knight g7. I just want to reinforce that knowledge. So bishop e7, g3, castles, bishop g2, knight e8, knight h3 is played by Tony Miles. You don't want to give up your good bishop for the knight. Knight d7, castles, g6, queen d3, knight g7, bishop to d2, and now f5. And in this position, if you want to pause the video, you can. What's the correct way to play now? Do you take? Do you play the move f4? Pause the video, make a decision. So here, the best move is f4, because, as we said, if you take, black can take with his g-pawn and bring another pawn closer to the center, then have options like e4 or f4. So by playing f4, you are forcing black to make a decision. As we said for black, whenever white plays f4, it's almost always correct to take it 90% of the time. So e takes f4. And now white can play in the king's Indian fashion as well, g takes f4, and that is the best move. You want to get another pawn closer to the center. So what does black have to do? Whenever there's pawn tension, there are chances for white to go with e5 or break open your position. This pawn sacrifice might actually be sound, so e5, d takes, f takes, or not a pawn sacrifice, but a possible pawn sacrifice. This would be deadly. So let's say black plays a6. Something like e5 could be very dangerous. Even if the knight can take this passed pawn, this protected passed pawn, and this bishop on g2 could be menacing. So after g takes f4, Yasser Seiravan of course takes, and we have knight takes e4 attacking the d6 pawn, and knight f6 challenging the knight. So in this position, they actually agreed to a draw after knight g3, knight f to h5, which I don't know why they did that. They should not have done that. I thought the position was fairly interesting because in this position after knight takes e4, you have the thematic position when the f pawn is gone and white has a knight on e4 attacking d6. The position is semi-open. White played the king's Indian fashion with g takes f, and this is a very rich position. In short, I mean, both sides still have their bad bishops. White's bad bishop is worse because black at least now has one diagonal for his. So I thought this was a very interesting game. So let's just go through the moves again. So white goes for the fianchetto, castles, bishop g2, knight e8, knight h3, kind of supporting f4, which is true, and provoking bishop takes h3, which is not going to happen. So knight e7, castles, g6, queen d3. Queen d3 prepares e5, supports against f5 because it overprotects f5, and it's just a good place for the queen. Knight g7, bishop to d2, f5, and now how do you meet f5 with either takes or f4? In this case, f4 was correct. When f4 is played, black has to take ef, gf, going for a central extra pawn, and now e5 would be a deadly move, so f takes e4, and after knight takes e4, you can see how useful this knight is. So remember patterns like this. Okay, now let's look at a game played between Levon Aronian and Zhao Cue. I'm sorry for my Chinese pronunciation. In this game, Levon Aronian went for knight b to d7 and h5, which is one of the main lines, but it's an interesting pattern to know, which I'm guessing most people wouldn't find on their own during a real game. So again, if you don't remember the opening moves, pause the video. Try to remember them. d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e5, knight c3, d6, e4. Again, bishop e7, bishop d3, and now instead of castling, there is a different move order here which allows you to go for a quick attack and a quick kingside expansion. And this is a pattern I really would like to highlight. Even if bishop e7 and castles is the main way to play, and most players with white who don't have too much experience in the Czech Benoni are going to expect that, this is still a possibility, and this could be a great surprise weapon. Now in this game, Aronian was 27-24, he's playing a 2400 rated opponent, so this plan makes perfect sense. He played knight b to d7. Why knight b to d7? Well, it's a useful move, first of all, and it also doesn't castle. So you sort of play a waiting move to see what white is doing. Now in this position, knight g to e2 is the most common move. If knight f3 is played, this idea I'm about to show you doesn't work. So if knight f3 is played, black is going to go for the maneuver which I'm going to mention in another game, knight f8, knight g6. Now knight f8 is a very useful maneuver before you castle because you don't have to waste time for rook e8, as we are going to see a bit later on, because you don't really want your rook on the e file anyway. Okay, so if white plays knight f3, you just switch plans, knight f8, knight g6, castle, and then go knight e8 and go for f5. But if white plays the main move, knight g to e2, you now have a much stronger idea here. You're going to go for h5, h4, h5. Okay, what's the idea about h5? What's the idea with h5? You are simply trying to force white to play a weird game where he can't really castle kingside. You want to expand, you want to stop stuff like g4, and you want to create a safer position for yourself on the king side. Now, you could play this position with something like g6 later and basically lock down the pawn structure, and you can also play it like a lunatic, and we're going to see what happened in this game. So here, white has two moves. I think the best move is h4, simply stopping the expansion. After this, black again switches plans, either g6 or knight f8, knight g6, which is the best plan. Knight g6. Now, white is eventually going to play g4 if the situation is favorable, but for now, that's not possible. So bishop e3, knight to g8, kind of waiting to see what white is doing. g3. This was now also attacking the pawn 3 times, so knight g8 is a threat. Something like a6, playing for b5 is a possibility, queen d2, bring the knight back. And this is a sort of waiting position where white has two pawn breaks, and it's not easy for black to play, because white is the one with two pawn breaks on his hands, and black only has the one, b5. So a common plan could be something like getting the knight to c7 if that's possible in this position, or playing rook b8, queen d7 or bishop d7 and b5. So in this position it's hard to make progress for black, which is why I think after h5, h4 is the correct way to play, which is also the most intuitive move. Now his opponent played f3 in this position, which doesn't really stop h4, so of course black plays h4. And now this is a ton of space. I mean, you have wasted a lot of moves, you wasted two moves. But it's now really awkward for white on the king side. Bishop e3, g6, solidifying your structure, preparing something like knight h5, preparing ideas like rerouting the bishop if you want to, also stopping any of the white pieces from coming into f5 and h5. And also supporting f5 later on. Queen d2, king to f8, you want your rook on the h file, but you want king safety as well, so g6 multi-purpose, also preparing king g7, a3, king g7, b4, white gets his pawn break in, black didn't stop it, a6. So now in this position, if black would really like to trade off this bishop white has, because it's the best piece. So if something like this happens, I'm sure black would be delighted. This bishop is a tall pawn anyway, so leaving it here wouldn't be such a big problem. Now white is left with his horrible bishop on d3. So after a6, knight a4 was played, b6, supporting now, of course, the c5 break, the c5 pawn, rook b1, and the position goes on from here. I just thought that this was a very interesting plan, because you are forcing white to keep his king in the center. He can't really castle kingside, and it's not easy to play. So this plan, you should remember. Now in this position, his opponent, I scrolled by a bit too quickly. His opponent did castle, which I really wouldn't recommend, especially against a stronger opponent. Bishop g5 was played. Why bishop g5? I mentioned that already. You want to trade off your bad bishop for white's good bishop. And usually you don't want to do that if f4 is a strong move. But in this case, f4 opens lines towards the white king. So f4, e takes f4. Whenever f4 is played, you take it. Knight takes f4, and now rook to e8, switching plans to the center, because now the e file is open. You now have a modern Benoni pawn structure, and now Levan Aronian went on to convert this game easily. Okay, let's go to the next one. I'm going to show you, in this game, this is by Theodor Gitescu versus Boris Spassky. Boris Spassky has white, so he won. And I'm going to show you one good plan of going for rook e8, knight f8, knight g6, black could go for, which black didn't go for, he lost instead. So again, I hope you remember the opening moves: d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e5, the Czech Benoni, knight c3, d6, e4. In this position, Theodor Gitescu plays bishop e7. We have knight f3, castles, bishop d3, all of these moves we have seen before. And now here, knight b to d7 was played, which is fine. Queen to e2 was played by Boris Spassky. And in this position, black went for knight e8, which is kind of too slow, because your knight is on d7. It's going to take some time to remaneuver your pieces to be able to play the move f5. And since your knight is on f6, for the moment you either want to support your position by bringing the other knight to the king side, or you want to find a pawn break. Since it's hard to find a pawn break, this maneuver of rook e8 and white castling and knight f8, knight g6 is the best way to play. Now, as we are going to see, Boris Spassky was quite aggressive in this game. So after queen e2, when black played knight e8, Boris Spassky went for g4. So you may be wondering, well, what if he plays g4 after rook e8? I'm going to turn on the engine for this. If he goes g4 here, first of all, you can just take it, but if you are afraid of opening up the g file, let's say rook to g1, that's really not such a big deal. You can just either play knight f8, defending your knight with the bishop, or you can retreat the knight. So sometimes when you play the Benoni, you need to have a ton of courage. So after queen e2, first of all, you are stopping g4 with your f6 knight, so you basically do not allow the idea white has. And with the move rook e8, you're also reinforcing your king further, you're opening up your bishop, and you're getting a better position. So one common theme for white, which I actually wanted to show with this game example, is that if knight e8 is played, always bear in mind, if your king is not castled yet, that g4 is an idea. So players with black, if the white king hasn't castled yet, be careful with knight e8 because g4 is coming. So this is a very common plan, and as you can see in this game, Boris Spassky went on to win this game quite quickly. First of all, the black king is horrible. The black pieces have no space. He locked down the position with g5, and then he played for f4. After f4, I mean, what do you do here? If you take it, it's not good. If you play f5, it's not good. gf6, knight f6, fe5, and disgusting king, passed pawn, white is winning. So g4 was a deadly idea in this game. Why? Because white kept his king in the center waiting for knight e8, and then he struck black's position with the early g4. Okay, next plan. We are going to be using the game Jindřich Trapel versus Ljubomir Fatachnik, and in this game Fatachnik was white. He won the game, and we are going to look at it from black's perspective, because in this position black went for g6, bishop to g7, which is a king's Indian kingside fianchetto idea. Again, the opening d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e5 Czech Benoni, knight c3, d6, e4. And here, instead of going for bishop e7 and castles, black goes for the king's Indian with g6. After g3, sort of a fianchetto king's Indian setup for white, bishop to g7. And now, if you are familiar with the king's Indian, black usually has a pawn on d6, 2 pawns on c7, e7, and he wants to go e5, after which white plays d5, and then he wants to go c5. So this is a position you could reach from the king's Indian. This is actually called the king's Indian system in the Benoni, which you can reach after the Czech Benoni. The difference is that you don't have to worry about options for white because you already have this locked down pawn structure. And same as in the king's Indian, black wants to go for pawn breaks. Okay, so here, of course, the main move for white is just bishop g2, and I'm going to show you the main line: castles, knight g2, knight h5. The same way you would play a king's Indian, you play knight h5 to play f5. Castles, f5. For white, whenever black plays f5, you either take it or you play f4. Since this is now a king's Indian, and this is something you have to be aware of with black and with white. And this is, in fact, in my opinion, one of the best ways to play the Czech Benoni, transposing into this king's Indian setup. When you play f5 and white takes it, you always take with the g-pawn. Why? You want those pawns, you want the kingside attack, you want to transfer your pieces towards the white king. Okay, you never take with a piece. And as in the game, if after f5 white plays f4, which is a better option, you just ignore the tension. This is something you need to, well, this in my opinion takes experience to be able to withstand this pressure of attention of f4, e4, f5, e5. Just continue with knight d7, bring more pieces in, queen c2. And after queen c2, of course, there is a threat of trying to overwhelm your pieces with something like bishop e4, knight e4, or bishop h3. pinning your pawn and winning material eventually. So after white starts reinforcing the position, you just go fe4, just get rid of that. Bishop to e3 is one move. White can also capture immediately. Bishop e3 is the best move though. And now e takes f4 is an option. There are several ways to play. Just remember this pattern of g6 and after g3, bishop g7. In this game, Ljubomir Fatachnik played the move f3, which has never been played, I think, before or since. And after knight h5, he played bishop h3. And this maneuver I'm going to talk about a bit later on in another game where it's better than here. But the idea is, I want to trade my bad bishop because of this pawn structure. Your f1 bishop is bad. I want to trade it for your good bishop, and there is no way for black to avoid that. So I'm going to show that in a different position. Okay. Now let's look at the game by Svetozar Gligoric having white and Tigran Petrosyan having black. Okay. In this game, it's all about playing for b5 as opposed to f5, and you're going to see black struggle to prepare the move b5, and sometimes it's painful to watch how, you know what he's trying to do, he tries to do it for 10 moves or 5 or 10 moves, and then it just fails. Okay. d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, Czech Benoni, knight c3, d6, e4. In this game, Petrosyan played knight b to d7, knight f3 was played by Svetozar Gligoric, and here immediately, instead of going for bishop e7 castles or g6, bishop g7 castles, he plays a6. Now, we know what that means. He wants to go for b5, and he's going to do everything possible to play for the b5 break. You might be wondering why not play knight a6, knight c7 for b5. Well, Petrosyan found a more useful way to go for that, and this is a maneuver I would like to show you. Bishop e2, bishop e7, castles, castles, knight e1. What does that mean? White wants to go for the move f4 eventually. And now, Petrosyan plays a very flexible move which we've seen before, knight e8. Now, usually, this is to prepare f5, this is to prepare g6, knight g7, f5, but also, as Petrosyan shows here, after knight d3 by white, he plays the move knight c7. So he actually transferred his f6 knight to the support of b5, which I found very interesting and I didn't see in a lot of games. There are no games from this position. In fact, after a6, there are only 11 games. Okay, so knight c7. White plays the move a4. Well, of course, b5 was a threat now. So what does Petrosyan do? He prepares it some more. And this is thematic. It's never a waste of time to prepare a pawn break for a long time if you can manage to play it and get a good position after you play it. So in this position, you could see that Petrosyan played a6, knight e8, knight c7, and now rook b8. So those are 4 moves just to prepare b5. So you know that he thinks that b5 is a very strong move. Bishop to e3, bishop g5, also a very sensible move. Why bishop g5? Your bishop is an idiot behind your pawn structure with c5, e5, d6. You want to trade it off. Queen d2, you can either take or defend. So he defends, bishop e3, queen e3. A small victory for black. He got rid of his bad bishop. White still has his. h6. A5. Now, h6 I don't really like. I mean, why play h6? I don't understand that. Why not just play b5 immediately? What's the point? Now, the thing is, if you play b5 now, you get a free pawn break with the open king. If you play anything else, as he played h6, it gives white time to play a5. And after a5, when you play b5, white can now take en passant ab, knight b. And it's not the same thing. Your a6 pawn is a weakness. You still have a pawn on the b file, but it would have been easier to just trade off the pawns. And in this position, after queen takes e3, if b5 happens, I mean, what are the options for white? A takes, and now what? If you can trade stuff off without leaving a weakness, okay, here you might be careful tactically about knight e5. But if you can trade off stuff after the b5 break without having an a6 pawn left on the board, that's a good decision. But he played h6, a5, b5, ab, knight b, b3. In this position, probably because knight b2, knight a4 was one idea. He wants to play rook b1 and transfer his pieces there. And now Petrosyan went badly wrong. It's not easy to play this position. I can understand that. But since b3 is a weakening move in a sense, because if you move your knight, you can win the pawn, Petrosyan's move doesn't make too much sense. And the engines actually, and this is the first time I'm going to use an engine evaluation for a game, for a move. After rook e8, they think it's +3 for white, and of course Gligoric was an excellent player. He just played f4, opened up the position using the fact that black played such a slow move as rook a8. And at several points, the engine actually wants black to play the rook back from a8 to b8. So this position was now better for white. Now, after b5, which he did manage to achieve, even if he didn't achieve it without having the weakness, if you turn on the engine is quite confused, and it wants to play several moves that look weird. Now, what I think he should be doing here is he should be preparing his other break in this position. He should be playing f5 either immediately or reinforcing it before playing it. And I think if you manage to get activity on both sides of the board, you're going to be equal. Now, the engines always give the Czech Benoni is better for white, but that's just not true. The engines still don't understand the power of pawn breaks, and they don't understand what it's like to play when there's so much tension in the position. Okay, now let's look at white's idea of playing the move bishop h3. Now, this is a game played several years ago by two fairly unknown players. White is Marcel Peck and black is Maya Chiburdanidze. I think they are rated about 23-2400. So black in the position after d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e5, knight c3, d6, e4, goes for a fianchetto structure, g6, and white plays the move g3, which is common. We are now again in the King's Indian system, and here black can play bishop g7, and then later on go for knight h5 and f5. We've seen this in several games. But after bishop g7, even though bishop g2 is the only move almost ever played, you can play h4 and f3. White played what I think is an incredible idea, and I really have seldom seen this. Fatachnik played it in a slightly different position, but white played the move bishop h3. And in this position, it's quite uncommon, but what do you do against it with black? You're forced to give up your good bishop for white's bad bishop. After bishop h3, knight h3, white did lose some time, of course, to do that. So queen d7, knight g5, castles. White did lose some time, but he got rid of his worst piece. And if you turn on the engine, this position is almost equal. It's plus 0.5 for white, plus 0.6, which is far less than the usual 1.5 white gets out of the Czech Benoni. But white is playing without his worst piece. So I really don't see a problem with that plan. The only objection I have after black castles is, well, maybe, or I would definitely go for that. Go for a kingside attack with white. Don't just castle. You don't have your light squared bishop on g2. Play something like bishop e3, queen d2, castles, queenside, and then h4, h5. I mean, the black king is fianchettoed. His bishop is stupid on g7. You can go f4, you can go h4. Why castle and accept the fact that black is going to start an attack? And black did win this game easily. This is what I think was the incorrect decision. Bishop h3 is a great idea. Now, let's look at a game in which Garry Kasparov played white. I'm going to show you a crazy idea for white, which actually works. Again, pause the video. What are the starting moves? Okay, so d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e5, Czech Benoni, knight c3, d6, e4. I hope everybody knows this by now. Okay, with white, Garry Kasparov, with black, Anthony Miles, and Garry Kasparov just crushed him in this game. And this was, I found this game absolutely incredible. And I'm afraid to play the Czech Benoni because of this. So if you're looking for ideas with white, how to defeat black, this is the game. Bishop e7, normal move, knight f3, normal move, castles, normal move, h3, slightly uncommon. Well, in this position, bishop e2 is the main move, h3 is the second choice. h3 looks slow, looks like you are trying to prevent something coming to g4, blah, blah, blah. But after knight b to d7, in this position, bishop d3 is the main move, g4 is the second move, but because of what Kasparov started playing. So in this position, g4, and he is the one who started this fashion of a kingside attack against the Czech Benoni. And in this position, Tony Miles played an imprecise move. Knight e8 is the main move, but I don't think it's so good. If you turn on the engine, a6 or h6 are probably better. Knight e8 just gets away from the attack. What I was calculating and trying to analyze was playing the move h6. And now, first of all, the immediate g5, which h6 seems to be like a stupid move, just inviting white to play g5 with two targets. After hg5, bishop takes g5 and something like knight takes d5. Knight takes d5. Queen takes d5, bishop takes bishop, you tactically win a piece. I don't think you win a piece back. I don't think there are such huge problems in this position. Queen d6, bishop e7. I mean, the d file is open, the center has blown open, your king is castled on the g file, which could be problematic, but the white king is still in the center, so I'm fine with this. If you don't want to go for that with white, if you don't want to play the immediate g5, let's say you try to prepare it with rook g1. After rook g1, just knight h7, and what's the issue here? If bishop e3, you continue with knight g5. If h4, I'm not sure about this, but I think, well, when g5 comes, you can just go h5, and I don't see a big problem with that. And if after h6, white continues with something normal, then you continue with something normal. Prepare b5 and just play the position. So I think knight e8 is a slightly unnecessary move. I would just rather stop g5. But Tony Miles plays knight e8. And this is, I think, going to be the most common way for people to react to your threat of g4. So after knight e8, bishop d3 by Kasparov, developing before starting an attack. a6 by Tony Miles. a4, rook b8 going for b5. It's correct to seek counterplay on the other side of the board, but as Garry Kasparov would say, not when your house is on fire. So rook g1. Knight c7, reinforcing b5. And now what we can notice is that black's pieces are kind of on the queen side. And Garry Kasparov is one of the best examples of that. Whenever you notice your opponent's pieces being on one side of the board, especially on the queen side, that means that their king is naked and that you can start an attack. So here, he plays a little preparatory move, b3, trying to solidify his position, rook e8, and now h4. Another piece got away, so Tony Miles was going for knight f8, probably trying to secure his position, but now all of a sudden, if you divide the board into three parts, you have the center with E and the D file, queen side CBA, king side HGF, there isn't a single piece on the king side for black. Look at this. And white has the f3 knight, g1 rook, the bishop staring at h7, the other bishop staring at h6, the queen staring at h4, and this could be a recipe for disaster. b5 by Tony Miles. Garry Kasparov just says, I don't care. He plays g5. Knight f8 trying to defend, h5, he doesn't care. Bishop to d7 trying to reinforce b5 and do something. Knight h2 just opening up the queen. And now bc. Bishop c, of course, the most solid way to play. You don't really need this bishop behind the e4 pawn. f5, lashing out, trying to break open the position. Of course, e takes f, opening up more lines. Bishop takes f, and now knight f1. This is my favorite move of the game. Most of us would do something like, think about something like h6 or g6, or transferring the other knight to the position with knight e2 and knight g3. But Garry Kasparov plays the move knight f1, and this is just a crushing move. You're going to get your knight to e3, whatever black does, and now what does this poor bishop do? This knight is the best piece on the board. e4 by Tony Miles, another risky decision. Bishop b2, look at this. This is just I'm not sure what the evaluation is. It's plus 1.5 according to the engines, now plus 2.5, plus 3. It keeps changing its mind. And if the best move is bishop d8, then, I mean, what are you doing? Okay, so what happened here was Garry Kasparov played the very early h3 and g4. To that, Tony Miles started preparing b5, which was imprecise because he got all of his pieces to the queen side and then Garry Kasparov just won. Okay, now another plan for white is to go for the early f4, but that's not dangerous for black, and now I'm going to show you how to react to that. So d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e5, knight c3, d6, e4, bishop e7. We've seen this position a ton of times. What if white plays f4 immediately? It is supported by the c1 bishop. So what do you do when white plays f4? If you can play f5. If you can't, you have to take it. You can't allow, well, there are two things that you are afraid of. You're afraid of him taking and creating a passed pawn. But more importantly, you are, if you castle, afraid of something like f5. And now you are just dead. This is over. You're just going to lose this game. So whenever f4 happens, you take it. White takes back. And now what's the issue? I mean, your d6 pawn is loose, but this is now a modern Benoni structure in which you have a fine position. Castles, bishop d3, rook e8. Just continue in the modern Benoni fashion. If you haven't seen the video on the modern Benoni, please do. It's on the channel. So if white plays the early f4, just take it and play the modern Benoni. Okay, now to finish with, I chose a game which I really like. This is a game in which Anatoly Karpov had the white pieces, Yasser Seirawan had black, and he crushed Karpov, although Karpov had missed one opportunity in this game, which Seirawan allowed with an imprecise move. Okay, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e5, knight c3, d6, e4. The idea is, what if white plays the early h4? Similar to what Kasparov did, but without g4. So h4 tries to gain space. Bishop e7, g3, white seemingly goes for the fianchetto. Castles, bishop g2, and after knight e8, Seirawan's favorite maneuver, either going for g6, knight g7, f5, or going for f5 immediately. Karpov plays h4. And now what to do here? Your king is already castled, and it may seem risky to do something rash. And the move that Yasser Seirawan played would be probably the last move I would ever consider in this position before looking at this game. And this is why I think it was very instructive. So if you want, you can pause the video and try to figure out what to do here. I looked at this position for 10 minutes without looking at the next move for black, trying to figure out what to do, how to defend when I was studying the Czech Benoni. Okay, in this position, Yasser Seirawan played g6, and I just couldn't believe my eyes. g6 is the only move that allows for h5 to become much stronger. You're not stopping h5, you're making it stronger. So, of course, h5 is played. And what's the idea here? Well, the idea is g5, and this is what I found absolutely incredible. I mean, he just played g6, g5, and he made h5 really impotent. Okay, the one thing, I'm sorry for whoever is challenging me, I'm not able to play now. The only thing I was interested in is, well, what happens after h6, which I would definitely play with white. Anatoly Karpov didn't play it, and that was another strange thing. Why didn't Anatoly Karpov play h6? Well, I'm sorry, I didn't want the engine to be on. After h6, you play f5, and apparently there are no problems. And Yasser Seirawan, of course, had to be aware of that because h6 is the visually most appealing move. After f5 takes, this bishop is now coming to g6. This pawn structure is perfect for black. So after g5, of course, Karpov did not want to go for that, even though it's one of the most tempting moves. He played bishop h3, trying to trade off black's good bishop. And of course, now Seirawan just plays h6, and no more attack. There's no attack for white. Bishop c8, queen c8, knight f3, normal moves. And in this position, Seirawan went badly wrong. Why? He played the move knight g7, and the move knight g7 is just a waste of time. what you have to do, you have to play f5. You have to play f5 before white consolidates and plays the move g4. You have to play f5. And after f5, something like queen e2, knight g7 is fine. Black is better. But instead of that, he played knight g7 here, and white played the move knight h2. And now what you have to do again, you have to play f5. You have to play f5, you have to play f5. Instead of that, he played knight d7. Now relinquishing some of the control over the f5 square. Knight g4. Again, now you have to defend, no time for f5, so king h7. Knight e3 was played. Now f5 is controlled a bit more, it's not so favorable. Knight f6, queen e2, and knight g8 was played. And in this position, Anatoly Karpov missed an opportunity to equalize in this position and actually be better. I wonder if you can spot the best move for white here, the move that would render black's position almost unplayable. After having such a good position, it was, I'm sorry, somebody is challenging me 10 times. Please don't do that. When I decline your challenge, I can't play. Okay, so 10 times he's challenged me during this recording. Okay, so in this position, what white should play is the move g4. After g4, f5 is not happening, and f5 just loses a pawn, and you can also play knight f5 and create a passed pawn. So after g4, bishop d2, castles queenside, knight f5, and white has just a very, very good position. Instead of that, which I found unbelievable, Anatoly Karpov played bishop d2, not fearing f5, and now after f5, e5, knight f5, queen to d3. Again, black is just slightly better. King h8 getting out of the pin. And Yasser Seirawan went on to win this position. I showed you what I wanted to show you, the main themes here. He just doubled his rooks and had more active pieces. Managed to defend his d6 weakness, break open the position with the move e4 at the correct moment. Again, unpinning. He had a monster bishop, much better minor piece. And this game isn't easily winning, especially on our mortal level. He challenged me again, now to a blitz game. I'm never playing you, ever. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I just don't believe that. Why would somebody challenge you 10 times if you keep declining the challenges? Sometimes I either record a video or analyze something, or I'm doing puzzles or creating studies, and people keep challenging me. Okay, I kind of lost myself here, but this is what I wanted to show you. I wanted to focus on the plans for both sides in the Czech Benoni. I hope you got some ideas. My advice moving on would be get some more games, find more games in the Czech Benoni. If you want a book recommendation, there's a book written by Larry Kaufman, who is a FIDE master, but his book is still great. He's one of the biggest exponents of the Czech Benoni. If you want games, look at Tony Miles, look at Yasser Seirawan. There are a few Anand games. Ben Feingold plays the Czech Benoni. There are a few people whose games you can check out. And as I said, theory is not important here. Pattern recognition is. Analyze games. The more games you analyze, the more ideas you absorb, you're going to be better. Remember to adapt. Remember to look at what your opponent is doing. And good luck in your Czech Benoni. Let me know what you think about the video. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.